Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by some of my favorite husky, hairy, huggable homos to review films either current or classic, or sometimes, given the COVID quarantine, we get a little creative with what we're doing. And this week, I think we've got a fun show for you. We're going to be reviewing Circus of Books, a new Netflix documentary all about the LA adult bookstore with the same name. It should be a fun conversation. I'm anxious to get into it. But before I do, let me introduce you to my wonderful co-hosts. Jim Pugliafico is with us here on the show. Hey, sweetheart, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, babe, for the intro. Looking forward to the show. I hope we get some excited listeners that have maybe seen this movie tonight, and looking forward to a lot of fun. So, welcome everybody.
Indeed. I think it's going to be a good conversation. It should be a lot of fun. Will Lindis is here with us as well. Welcome, Will. How are you?
Hey, guys. I'm glad to be here for our Circus of Podcasting.
Nice. And Sammy W is with us in the live chat from Denver. Hey, Sammy. He says, I love books. Sammy, do you love books with a circus theme, though? I think is the question.
Or books that you get at a circus, you know?
Well, when I think of circuses, I always think of the big top. So that's sort of the theme that I think is most resonant for me. But I don't know.
It can be fun to be under the big top sometimes. Speaking of which, we should probably warn you. So this episode is all about a documentary, all about an adult bookstore. So we usually earn our explicit tag with a couple of F words every episode. We'll probably be talking about some very adult topics. So I don't know anyone that personally brings their kids in the room to listen to the podcast with them. But if that's you, just FYI, if you don't want your children to hear, certain adult terms that we may bring up, just a heads up on that. So be aware. But we're going to jump into that conversation here in just a couple minutes. Before we do, though, some interesting news coming out of the Hollywood Reporter this week. An article came out basically giving some information around a little bit of a lot of dispute between AMC Theaters and NBC Universal. NBC Universal recently released Trolls World Tour for digital.
Yay.
For digital streaming rental at $20 a pop in order to watch that movie. We were talking about this when we reviewed that film. And Will, I think you had brought up a question would parents rent this movie over and over and over again so their kids can keep watching until it's available for purchase? I heard from a friend of mine who has two little kids. They rented the movie 6 times at $20 a pop. Yeah, so it's making its money. In fact, according to this article from the Hollywood Reporter, which actually sourced some information from the Wall Street Journal, NBC Universal has pulled in over $100 million in revenue for Trolls World Tour, despite it only being available on a digital platform, not actually in theaters at this point. Which, this is kind of a new ground in a way, right? Having movies come straight to a digital platform like this. So this has ignited a little bit of an issue because NBC Universal has basically said going forward, as theaters reopen, they're going to be releasing movies on both formats, in theaters and instant digital rental for streaming. And I guess AMC Theaters, their CEO, basically said that's unacceptable. That NBC Universal is cutting movie theaters out of their rightful take of the money that would otherwise come to them from these first-run movies coming through in a digital movie house. And so basically AMC has said at this point, they will not be showing any NBC Universal movies in their theater chains in the United States. AMC is the biggest theater chain here in the U.S. That's quite a bit of revenue that NBC Universal could lose out on, especially with Fast and Furious 9 coming out, as well as some other films that are expected to be just huge blockbusters in theaters. So I'm curious, Jim, well, what do you guys think of this? I mean, the model seems to be changing. It's igniting a little bit of a war. Is this expected, unexpected? Where do you guys weigh in?
Oh boy, I can't say it's totally unexpected. I know there's always been the contention now between the studios who want to get their content out in front of as many paying customers as possible, versus movie houses who feel that they have some sort of mandate or bestowed right to be able to have first access to putting these movies out and being in that revenue stream. I can't say I'm surprised. I think it's just another knock to traditional movie houses, and it's like brick by brick. I think we're bringing, kind of the movie theater experience down to being, maybe more of a niche market. I think the writing's on the wall that we're kind of moving toward a different way of movie distribution and being able to see movies. I think there'll always be movie houses that we can go to and see movies. I don't think they're necessarily going away. So I don't want you to think that I believe that, but I think that we may see some of these movie theater chains in light of this type of distribution scheme and the damage from this COVID-19 lockdown. I just think there's going to be some movie theaters that are going to be maybe not even reopening some. So we'll have to see how that goes. I'm worried. I'm not surprised. But it's a changing landscape. That's all I can say.
It's hard because at the end of the day, it's one big corporation squabbling with another big corporation, and there's a little part of me that it feels a little weird to sort of like take sides in that sort of thing. But it's a complex situation that we've got going on right now. The other thing to look at, and this is where I'm a little more partial to, NBC Universal's stance here. The landscape that we've got both now and going forward and for the next year is still very, very flimsy and ever shifting. For example, here in Austin, our governor has decided, let's open everything up. And I've got a 2-hour long podcast I could do about my feelings on that. But all of that notwithstanding, one of the things that came as part of that governor's edict was like, hey, movie theaters can open up now as early as this weekend, just at 25% capacity, but they can open now. And the big chains are like, cool, let's do it. And our chains like Alamo Drafthouse, Austin Film Society, like these things that are very part of Austin are like, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to open at 25%. We're going to hold everything back because we want to make sure that our staff is safe. And so part of what when I was reading the NBC's stance, all I could think of is like, that's not a terrible stance to make. Like, hey, going forward, we're probably going to use both platforms because this whole thing is really weird and up in the air, So I kind of don't get the, drawing the line in the sand here. I mean, I don't run AMC, so it's obviously not my pocketbook that's affected. And we only have one AMC local, so I don't have like a good bias one way or the other towards them. We're more of we have Cinemark and Regal and are kind of chains here. But I don't know. I think there's always going to be a spot for movie theaters, in the after times, once we get to them, right? Yeah. While we're kind of in these current times, obviously things are very weird. And I think that the organizations and the companies that are, most willing to sort of adapt what they're doing with their models are going to be the ones that are going to be the most likely to shape what's happening afterwards. And that's a good thing. That's what we would want. Even even organizations that are known for being a little more staunch, like the Academy Awards, the Oscars, they've announced like, hey, look, we have this whole rule in place about you have to have a 1 week uninterrupted in LA, New York, before any streaming happens to be eligible for Oscars. And they've said, hey, while this is still happening, any movie that was supposed to have a theatrical release that had to do digital instead still qualifies. They don't have to re-release it. They don't have to push it in. And that's a lot of adaptation from an organization that I think isn't necessarily known for adaptation. So I don't know. It was a very, when I was reading this news, it was a really weird set of shots fired, like sort of like a, hey, you know, if we don't get your exclusive rights, then we don't want to play with you at all. And it feels like that's, you know, we had mentioned before that, like, you know, NBC Universal is going to lose a lot of money on this. AMC is going to lose a lot of money, too, from not playing those Fast and Furious things. So, I don't know. It's almost like shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, it's a little curious. It's almost like, well, I'm just going to take my ball and go home. But the problem is then nobody gets to play. Everybody loses, right? And it's unfortunate. I mean, I think as consumers, we're going to have options to see films. Not that the Fast and Furious movies are my favorite ones to rush out and see in theaters, because they're not. But, I mean, Universal puts out a lot of things that I think we're looking forward to seeing. So, you know, whether we can see that at an AMC, it sounds like not. We usually go to a Cinemark anyway. So as a consumer, you know, babe, you and I, maybe it doesn't impact us that much, but.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, what if it was Cinemark? Then it would affect us more. I mean, we have both AMC and Cinemark here, probably in equal numbers. So here, you know, we always have the other option. Will you live in a market that is rich with Alamo Drafthouse chain, kind of the base for that. So it appears that you'll probably have that for the longer time. We're talking about like mainstream, you know, people who go to the theaters and always go to an AMC or whatever, right? They're going to be more affected. The other thing I want to say is that, you know, these kind of posturing that's going on, this is really breaking news. These things tend to morph. They tend to be rescinded. They tend to, you know, have a board meeting and make deals. That's been the nature of this business all along. However, all I'm going to say is it's just another aspect of this changing landscape that we have. Steve Scott in the chat here, our chat, says maybe you've covered this and we hadn't. But maybe we touched on it a little bit. But the big studios have been looking to cut the theaters out of the loop for a while, right? And I don't know if it's. I mean, it depends, right? It depends on how much of the revenue they're going to get, right? It really probably for them it comes down to numbers. I don't think it's like, hey, the big studios just hate movie houses and they want to cut them out. I just think it's depending on the contracts they make with these people as to whether, you know, they find it beneficial for them or not. But
and one thing to think about right now is, you know, COVID streaming revenue numbers, I think are going to be different than streaming revenue numbers outside of COVID, right? Like right now, Jim, you and I paid $20 to watch Trolls World Tour, right? But like when COVID isn't happening, when social distancing isn't a thing, what if we decide we want to pay our $20, but have 20 friends over to watch a movie, right? Those same 20 people aren't going to be renting the movie on their own. They're not going to be going to the movie theater to see it on their own. So like, how's that revenue potentially impacted?
Well, and those parents that you mentioned that rented it, you know, 5, 10, 1,000 times, and put all of that into it, it's because there have been a limited number of options and they're stuck inside with the kids all day while also having to do work from home meetings on Zoom. And it is way cheaper to rent a movie for $20 for 2 days than to try to find a 6 foot distant babysitter. So those numbers are, even for the target audience, are going to be inflated. But I think the big studios, realistically, they need the theater system. Like when you think about someone like Disney, Like, and Disney has a lot of properties, and a lot of them are the big properties. They have sort of staked a big portion of their reputation on look at our $1 billion global release. Look at the money we've done in China. Look at the money that we've done domestic. That's why they were very willing to push all of their stuff back, and why they've been very hesitant to put anything of sort of like that type of clout on their Disney Plus platform, because they know that that's not Pandora's box that they personally want to open. And Disney is a blockbuster leader in a lot of ways. I think that we're going to see probably the same thing. If I'm putting on my prediction hat, we're going to see the same thing happen here that we saw happen when Disney and Sony had their little spat about who would get Spider-Man, and we all knew what would happen, and we all were kind of in the news cycle anyway, and that none of them were going to come to any type of like amicable thing publicly quickly, because both of them have to stay back and save face, but they both know it's financial suicide to not work something out. The exact same thing is happening here. They are in a sort of like a standoff, each one with kind of the gun to the other one's head, and they also both know that they can't stay in that stance forever. There's going to be some conversations, and they're going to come up with kind of a mealy-mouthed way of like one side of this retracting or backpedaling or something like that, and it'll be sort of a nothing burger at some point in the future.
I don't know. We'll have to see. But given everything going on, I think Cate Blanchett said it best when she said, "The world is changing. I can feel it in the air." That's my best Cate Blanchett Lord of the Rings impression. But it'll be interesting to see when this all shakes out, how things sort of fall, right? How things change and morph as a result of all this. Yeah. So I guess the thing is, we'll see.
I just know that I'm with Steve. I need theaters too. I need to see movies in theaters. The home experience is cool. It's convenient. We even have a little movie room set up just for, large format projection of movies and games, and it's basically comfy seats and everything. It's just not the same. I like it. Don't get me wrong. I like it, but it's not the same as a movie theater experience. Hate to see us lose that. I don't think it's going to happen soon, but I do think it's on this kind of a slope right now.
Yeah. I think we're more at risk of art house theaters maybe having that problem, but I think the blockbusters, they're going to be here for a while. Like, obviously there's going to be an interruption too, because the next wave of what we're going to see is a lot of the shooting and production cycles have been interrupted. And that's going to affect films coming a ways out. Yeah. And so there's going to be sort of a second wave of disruptions when there's just not as many films in the pipeline. But at the other end of this, we're going to have a lot of people who are ready to get outside of the house and need something to do. And movies are one of the most common, like, man, I wish movies, even from non-movie fans. So I think we're going to see like a weird little snapback on the other side of this.
That sounds like a punk rock band name. Waves of Destruction.
Yeah, it does.
It's funny. I know we have a whole movie to discuss, so we probably need to segue soon. But Noah in the chat, hey Noah, had mentioned drive-in theaters. And man, oh man, I wish we had a drive-in theater in Tucson. Because Jim, I know it's not the same as going to our favorite Cinemark, but like, how awesome would it be to at least get out of the house to go see a movie for a change? Real quick, hot takes. What do you guys think? There's like 300 operating drive-ins in the U.S. right now. There's something like 700 deactivated drive-ins just gathering dust out there. You think we'll see more of them activated if this all goes into summer?
Maybe a few, and that might be a fun novelty. You know what I mean? For people to see, to see a movie in a different environment. There are people. Imagine that there are people around here who've never seen a movie at a drive-in, but I have, and it's a fun experience. Can be fun. I would like to see a few more drive-ins pop up, because for a while, like here, even in Tucson, we didn't have any. I don't know if we have any yet at this point. I'd like to see one pop back up here that we could maybe go see once in a while. Sure.
That would rock. All right. Well, there's no silver bullet answer, it seems. The landscape is changing, and I think we're all just doing our best to roll with the changes. But hopefully, things shake out okay. But Jim, Will, we got a movie to talk about. How do you guys feel about switching gears a little bit and talking about some motherfucking adult bookstore shenanigans?
Love it.
Oh my God, yes.
All right. We are going to talk Circus of Books, the new Netflix documentary all about the adult bookstore in LA with the same name. If you're not familiar with our format, we are going to talk about the film spoiler free for probably 10, 15 minutes. Then we'll give a fair warning if you're listening or watching live. We'll put that in the live chat. Well, thanks in advance for doing that. And of course, we'll let you know audibly if you're listening via digital tape delay when we're going to go into spoiler territory. If you are listening via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, etc., Jim will have lovingly created a time index for you that you can skip around. That way, if you listen to the non-spoiler section, maybe you're on the fence, you can protect your innocence and skip on to plugs at the end. Jim, would you not say you lovingly craft that time index?
I do. I definitely do. I put so much love into that time index that sometimes my fingers get sticky. So I mean, that's how much love I put into that.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Now. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Processing. All right.
Whatever floats your little gay boat, babe. It's okay by us. As long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, consent is sexy. All right. So here we go. Our discussion of Circus of Books. All right. Well, unfortunately, there was a little bit of a hiccup with YouTube. Everybody, watching funny cat videos when we were trying to record. So we actually switched over to Skype to finish our episode for this week. So unfortunately, it means we don't have our normal studio live audience. I don't think we normally have a laugh track in that live studio audience. Hopefully they're organic laughs. But in any event, we're going to go ahead and just finish up here. And we've got something cool we're bringing your way after we review Circus of Books. We'll talk more about that here in just a few minutes. But Jim, why don't you go ahead and kick us off if you don't mind? Spoiler free, of course. What is Circus of Books, and is it something that you enjoyed, or maybe not so much?
Oh no, I mean, Circus of Books is a new documentary, and you guys know how much I'm really liking documentaries. Seems like we're in kind of a phase now where documentaries are just fantastic, just a lot of great ones. And this one for me falls right in there with the really, really good ones. This one is about Circus of Books is about how a married Jewish couple owned and managed a porn shop and video store in LA that became sort of a mecca for LA's LGBT community from the late 70s and then running for like over 40 years. And this documentary is done primarily through the eyes of this couple, their family, their employees, and most importantly, when we talk about family, the director, Rachel Mason, who is the daughter of the couple who run this store. And it turns out that this documentary has so many more layers than just a story of a couple running a porn, a porn shop, and how, that juxtaposition can be humorous, great, unique. We get it. But there's just so many layers to the story, and we'll get to some of those in spoilers. I don't want to spoil them off the top, but let's just say that there's some historical significance to the story of this shop. There's some poignant family stories that are part of this. I really loved this documentary, Circus of Books. And the best part is it's available right now on Netflix, and people should just go and watch it. It's definitely worth watching.
Sounds like the story of Karen and Barry Mason and Circus of Books really landed well for you, Jim. Glad to hear that
Yeah.
you enjoyed it so much. Will, how about for you? I mean, did you have a similar reaction to Jim, or did you diverge?
Very similar reaction. This was one I was very fortunate to have seen back last August. We featured this one as our secret screening at the Eglet Festival here in Austin, and that's a tricky spot for secret screening, to have a documentary. Normally, that's the spot where you put like the crowd pleaser, the big sexy, but the film had just been acquired by Netflix at the time, so we knew it had some legs, and we also, having seen it, knew it was like going to be a home run for our audiences. And sure enough, like, it was the thing, or one of the things that was the most talked about and most in the most favorable fashion after that festival. And so I'm delighted that people are able to see this, because we had this like really wonderful little moment here in Austin, but now I can share that with everybody who's watching it on Netflix here at home, especially in this time of COVID-19, and we're all like, you know, self-isolating and looking for things to do. This is a wonderful, wonderful way to spend your time in isolation. The story is about this couple that, my friend put it this way, and I'm going to completely crib his words. This couple that sort of falls into history and community. You know, they come into this business having tried some different avenues, different things, successful in their own rights in different ways, but they come into this business here in LA, working this bookstore in this gay community, and they become icons within it. They become this very important touchstone, both within the LA community and across all of like gay porn. You know, anyone who viewed gay porn through, you know, print or VHS or anything like that for decades, you know, there's a very good chance that you had something that Circus of Books gay porn distribution may have touched. So congratulations, gays. You know, this is very pertinent to you. But more so than that, this is a very sweet, very funny, very heartfelt story of family. The family that's at the core of this story, as they kind of go through their trials and tribulations, through them having to have their own come to grace moments with the line of work that they do, with the product that they're putting out, and the people that work in and out of their lives. This is an absolute delight. You don't have to be a connoisseur of gay porn to appreciate Circus of Books, but if you are, I think you'll appreciate it all the more.
Sounds like it was a big hit for you as well, Will, and I know that, you know, you obviously got to see this 8, 9, 10 months ago, whatever that was at this
in the before times.
In the before times, you know, BC 19. But I feel really lucky to have this film available on Netflix to see right now. In fact, I've seen it once, and I'm tempted to go watch it again, to be honest, because I feel like there's things that, you know, maybe I missed, want to go back and maybe revisit, which is interesting for me because you guys know documentaries are usually not my jam.
Right.
Usually not a huge fan of documentaries, but this one was charming. It had a lightheartedness to it that this might sound weird, but sort of pairs well with some of the more serious tones of message, right? Like if you watch the trailer for this, it talks about like this, you know, incredible porn store, video distribution, but also the HIV and AIDS crisis hitting and happening, right? And sort of viewing that through that lens. And I think you could very dangerously fall into the trap of everything being super sad, super maudlin, super like devastating, but being able to follow the throughput of this family. And even beyond, the employees who worked at the store, yeah, I mean, we're hearing about a very serious topic, but we're also kind of learning like some of the fun things I think that help to explain how they managed that time and how they got through that. And I think that speaks a lot, you know, to just our journey as gay men or people in the LGBT community, in the AIDS-stricken community. A lot has changed since then, right? But I think this is phenomenal and fascinating, especially looking at it from the employee's point of view. I mean, I can only imagine, right, like what it's like working in a store like that. I mean, I've been into an adult store before to like
You have?
I know. To like
Ooh.
buy a flogger,
Surprised
or
you admit that.
buy a big bottle of lube, or but I've never been to like I don't know, like an adult arcade or something with booths where you like watch videos and put in tokens. I've never done that. And Circus of Books, I don't think really had much of that going on. We've got an interview coming up later with Freddie Berkovitz from the film, and maybe he'll have some insights. I'm not sure if that was ever part of Circus of Books, but it's just the culture, right, of that store and that environment is really fascinating to me. So I'm excited to chat with Freddie here in a little while and kind of hear a little bit more about his experience. But man, this was fascinating from family, from employee, from community angles across the board.
I shared this film on Facebook, just like, as we do, like, hey, we're getting, in fact, I think a lot of us did, all three of us did that at some point. Like, hey, we're getting ready to talk about this next week. Check it out on Facebook. And I remember several of my straight friends who, follow me on Facebook, like, okay, I'll give this one a watch. And then they would come back and they'd be like 5 stars, 5 out of 5. Yeah. Perfect. Loved it. And I think that speaks to, this is a very specific story, but it's also very universal. I think that anyone can appreciate this story. There's just enough like scandal and intrigue or whatever it is to sort of like keep you going. But there's also interesting, honest to God, likable characters, good people. It's sort of the opposite of something like, like a Tiger King or something like that, which is, much more about like characters you don't want to follow. You love all of the people in this movie and you appreciate their point of view. Even when some of those points of views clash with one another, you can understand that these are honest to God, sincere people who are just trying to do the best that they can.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about a lot about the porn shop and bookstore angle to this because it's called Circus of Books. But I mentioned earlier that it's layers. I mean, there's a whole part of this I didn't expect about the porn industry and about distribution of porn during those times and how that machine kind of worked through how the shop got involved with that and how people who work for the shop got involved with that. And we're going to have much more about that too. But there's also a very personal story here. There's like a very strong character arc for one of the main characters in this movie, one of the main subjects of this movie, which I found very poignant and comes from kind of the family angle. This movie does remind me a lot about a lot of one of my favorite documentaries and favorite movies of all time, Sarah Polley's Stories We Tell.
Yes,
absolutely. Because it puts a spotlight on happenings, partly on happenings within a family, told by one of the family members with a personal angle, and I love that.
And I think that really speaks to why I enjoyed this documentary as much as I did. Like most documentaries, for me at least, not being a doc aficionado, are cold. They're very intellectual. They're very far removed, right? Like you may be learning about a subject, and yeah, you have people coming in and sharing interesting insights, but I think missing is that throughput of personal experience. And I loved the stories we tell. And so to see Rachel, like talking to her mom in the documentary, talking to her brothers, her dad, like, as much as this is the story of Karen and Barry, I think it's the story of the rest of the family as well and what they went through. And even the employees kind of have their little arcs too. So I think bringing that personal element into it as much as Rachel did, like, is just so fantastic. And I think makes this documentary incredibly accessible, even to people who typically hate documentaries. So this gets a giant recommend from me. Well, Jim, it sounds like it does from you guys as well.
It does. And there's a lot of little hidden gems within this as well. We get to see my favorite drag queen of all time, Alaska Thunderfuck, appears several times in this because Alaska was a worker at the Circus of Books and is interviewed. And so it was so great seeing some more great Alaska interviews. And beyond that, as much as this is a very universal story that I think anyone can follow because of the story and the family issue, the fact that this is something that is gay bookstores, especially kind of in the pre-internet era, of which my sort of like coming out experience sort of like bridged the two, you know, because I was a young man and teenager during kind of the pre-internet, but like, you know, I was coming of age and coming into my own during the age of the internet, and so I missed out on some of the of what I'm about to talk about. But gay bookstores were an important part of our community. It's a place where we could like meet one another. It's where we could share ideas. It's where we could feel validated in our likes and interests. I remember being very young, you know, of age that I could enter a porn. I was probably like right at 18, to be honest. Finding what, like, you know, we're driving, found a little like, you know, the roadside XXX shops. I'm like, oh gosh, scandal. What am I going to do? I think I'll go inside there, you know? And you go through and it's like, there's so much of it that's like not for you. There's like, but then you see the section that's like the gay content. You're like, this feels right. You know, this is my people. And there's other people, enough so that they would like purchase and print and distribute this material that's for me. And so it makes you feel like less like isolated and alone. And nowadays you can pop onto like Growler, Scruff, or Grindr, or whatever, and meet other people like that. But then you didn't. I remember going through the magazines and finding an issue, Bear Magazine number 50, with Jack Radcliffe on the cover. And
Jack Radcliffe.
And it was one of those just sort of like, oh, like this isn't like, this is it. I think that it, like, seeing stuff like that helps to sort of like normalize your experience. And I appreciate that. And so I appreciate what this film gave me as a gay man, as a lover of cinema, just all of that. It pushed a lot of my buttons.
Yeah. And Will, as you were talking, I mean, I'm thinking back on my experiences with the bookstores, you know, as for a good portion of my life growing up, you know, closeted, these places can be a lifeline, even though it feels a little bit like a slimy lifeline, right? Like a little dirty, right? And it's especially when you're in the closet, right? This stuff is, you know, it's something to be hidden away, but it is nonetheless, they are a lifeline. And I think a lot of people probably discount the importance of places like this. They may not be as important today as they were then, before the age of the internet and streaming porn and everything else. But yet this documentary, I think, highlights how important that they were, even to, you know, quote unquote straight guys, or straight people, right? That would probably walk through those doors hoping nobody saw them, but they would.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, man, hearing about your guys' experience, when I turned 18, I bought a lottery ticket. But then again, I lived in a farming community. That was the big thing to do when you turned 18. I probably didn't start entering the gay porn scene with like magazines and DVDs and stuff until I was in college several years later.
DVDs, man.
DVDs. But I mean, just having access to materials like that, like, yeah, some people are like, it's smut, like it's dirty, it's evil. But you know what? Smut is the way that we find each other sometimes. And I don't think we'd have the community that we have today and that we enjoy as much as we do today without stores and distributors like Circus of Books. And big, huge, you know, just props to Rachel for telling the story of, you know, her mom and dad and this incredible community epicenter and the role that it played. I know that we typically would go into a spoiler section at this point. I'd ramble some stupid thing to give people time to scoot away or skip forward if they're listening on digital tape delay. But we're going to do things a little bit differently this week. Instead of just jumping into a spoiler section where we spoil the film, we actually have a great opportunity to sit down with Freddie Berkovitz, who is a filmmaker, distributor. He worked with Karen and Barry Mason with Circus of Books, and he's going to have, I'm pretty sure, some awesome insights into a lot of those different aspects. So we're going to bring Freddie on here in just a couple minutes. As we talk to Freddie, just keep in mind, we'll probably spoil certain aspects about the film through the course of the conversation. So if you haven't seen Circus of Books yet, it is on Netflix. It is available right now. Feel free, hit the pause button, go watch that for a couple hours, come on back, and tune into our chat with Freddie, because man, I bet he's going to have some fun things to share. And that will be our spoiler section for this week. Jim, yeah, did you have a thought?
Oh yeah, sounds great. And I do believe, you know, even though we might be spoiling some of the movie during our talk with Freddie coming up, I would suggest watching the movie because I'm pretty sure there's some surprises in this movie that that you will delight in and get a lot out of that might not even come up in our interview with Freddie. So take my word for it. Watch the movie.
Yeah.
It's easily accessible and well worth your time.
I completely agree. All right. Well, with that said, we're going to jump into our interview with Freddie Berkovitz. He's ready to go. We're going to get that started. And can't freaking wait to hear what he has to say. So let's do it. Here we go. Say hi to Freddie. All right, so we are here with a very special guest from Circus of Books. We are very happy to introduce Freddie Berkovitz. Freddie, welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So glad to hear that, and so glad to have you with us. Of course, seeing Circus of Books on Netflix, huge fans of the film, and you were definitely a big part of that. It was a delight to watch you talk about
I was on for maybe five times.
I mean, 5 times is a lot more than other people, probably.
Okay.
You know? But
let's just say you made an impression.
You did.
You made the cut.
But it was a lot of fun hearing about some of your experiences. But of course, we were left wanting more, and so we were so excited when we reached out, and you were like, "Yeah, let's do this." So thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, I was just kind of curious, kind of taking us back to the beginning of your experience with Circus of Books. Can you tell us a little bit about how you first came to know Karen and Barry Mason, and kind of how you were brought into that Circus of Books team?
Well, okay. It really, my life in porn started in the 80s. I was in savings and loans for 11 years, and I quit and got into managing a phone sex company after I answered an ad on how to talk dirty on the phone.
Oh.
It turned out that they weren't, you know, I couldn't do it very well, but I could manage the back office. So that lasted for a while, and then I was hired by The Advocate, and I also worked at Catalina Video for a while. That's when I met Shishi LaRue. And and then I, you know, moved around a little bit, and then there was an opportunity to come on board with Circus of Books around 1990 or 91. And, you know, they're my local neighborhood bookstore, gay bookstore, and I was thrilled at the chance to manage their wholesale division, which, you know, was a fairly plum job, I suppose, at the time, but I had come with some experience. Yeah. No pun intended.
And the documentary, Freddie, gets into explaining, like, it becomes apparent that Circus of Books, over the 40-something years that the documentary covers, kind of held a unique spot in the LA LGBT scene, right? With maybe you can talk a little bit about that, like how significant was that business within the community where you lived?
Well, I lived in West Hollywood.
Yeah.
You know, I actually lived in one particular apartment from 1980 to 1995, and which was up on San Vicente above Santa Monica, which I call the center of the universe, that intersection, the gay universe. But Circus of Books was, I would say it's geographically midway between the east side, Silver Lake, and the west side, Boys Town. So really in the armpit of West Hollywood. And right across the street, up the block there, was the Gold Coast. So it already proximity was next to a gay bar. And the hours in those days, actually, I think it might have been 24 hours a day. And so people, when they finished drinking, they would walk across the street and cruise and pick up guys that they were just standing next to because they couldn't make a date at the bar, but they could make a date after hours behind the bookstore, in the bookstore. And Circus of Books had a variety of literature. In the early 90s and the late 80s, I didn't even have a VCR maybe until much later. I used to buy the dirty magazines. And when I say dirty, I mean the ones I jacked off to. So,
as one does.
As one does. Yeah. As I did probably daily for 30 years in the day. But I boast. But in the day, that was my source of pleasure. And then obviously technology came in, and we all started getting VHS tapes. The interesting thing about VHS was that if you made a second copy, they were not always as quality. There was a lot of interference. And so in the beginning, we sold thousands of VHS tapes. Really, literally, the first day of a release were thousands out the door. It was quite a task to fulfill initial releases. And one of our big jobs was to prepare for a release date weeks in advance by boxing tapes, storing them until the ship date. So we kept UPS very busy, very busy.
One of the things that was so exciting to me about the documentary was just all of the different personalities and the different stories and just all of the life that I got from the Circus of Books, like family and team and that story. And because of that, and I'm excited, I get to kind of ask the juicy question. Can you tell us a little bit about, any anecdotes or stories or any just fun moments that are shareable from your experiences with Circus of Books?
Well, I could say, first of all, it was a very business-like atmosphere. They hired me because I was, I knew how to add numbers. I came with business background. I wasn't obsessed with sex. So I wasn't distracted by the material, which could have been very distracting. There was no casting couch to get in the movies because we really weren't a production company. We were a distribution company. So if a porn star came in from off the street and tried to rub on my leg to get into a movie, I could say, well, I don't know, you do it. I can't do it. So everybody, even in front of the camera, really was very pleasant. And I would see them at conventions and at nightclubs. It was a family operation. The wife, Karen, and husband, Barry, were like a mom and pop. And, the fact that she was Orthodox or conservative Jew and he was agnostic, well, that's about the same in a lot of Jewish families, that there's a blend of different levels of commitment to that culture. I myself am what I would call more of a cultural Jew. I had a bar mitzvah. The only temple in the neighborhood was Orthodox, so the women were separated from the men. But I like to say it didn't stick. So, however, I'm glad I had that background. And so there was wonderful people that worked in the warehouse where I worked, and then they worked at the stores. And I rarely went into the stores. Barry's philosophy was to allow the managers of each division to run the way they saw fit. So he was really hands-off. So he came into my office to sign contracts, mostly. Never had anything to say about the content of the movies. And even when it became the trend to have condom in movies, like in 1995, and there were some producers who wanted me to sell bareback movies, I actually chose not to, and I felt it was my duty not to. I was called the condom Nazi.
Whoa.
Okay.
So, but the stores sold bareback movies, and they had a right to. And, it was okay. Let them do it. It was okay with me.
Freddie, you mentioned the porn distribution aspect of Circus of Books, and it's interesting that we're called the condom Nazi, given everything that was going on. Do you feel like that at all hurt the distribution in some ways, or? No,
there was plenty of room for everybody in the market. I have a funny story. So, whatever you get off, you get off on. And we tried to actually make safe sex interesting and appealing. And I don't think that the majority of movies at the time, barebacking was still kind of controversial. There was not a cure like there is today. Today, AIDS is like a manageable disease like diabetes, I believe, I would say, for most people. But back then it was still kind of a scary thing to deal with, and the treatments were harsh.
Yeah.
So, I even had a time in my own life in the early 80s, I had something they called afraids, which was where I didn't have sex for like a few years in the early 80s because I thought, okay, well, I can kind of like wait until they figure out what's going on, because we didn't know if it was from poppers. We didn't know if you could get a kissing or, what it was coming from. We didn't know for a while.
And you talked about the tapes and, distributing like the hard copy tapes, right? VHS tapes. I'm from the era of VHS tapes. So I remember going into the back room of regular video stores, right? And renting the tapes. And I understand what you say about like selling the tapes is different than today because, like you can make a copy of a tape and then a copy of that tape, but every time you copy it, right, the quality is degraded. Whereas today you have digital media, digital platforms, streaming, apps, and all of that seems to have obviously eroded what was kind of the empire built on VHS, and even to some degree affecting the porn industry in general, right? Because now you have all this free porn available. So can you talk about what it was like to kind of experience maybe the beginning of that erosion a little bit?
The business model changed. I don't know if anybody is familiar with this show called The Deuce. I would recommend it. It's about the beginning of the adult business in the 70s and early 80s. Huh. It's a great show. Maybe it was an HBO show. Maggie Gyllenhaal.
Oh.
And anyway, so what was interesting about VHS was, you're right, we had to sell a store 12 copies where they would rent them out, especially an A title. B title, they might take 5 copies or even 3 copies. But an A title, they would have to take 12. Well, when DVDs came out, that was like handing people a master. In the very beginning, they couldn't crack the DVD, but eventually the software came out where you could even duplicate DVDs. So then the stores just started buying, less DVDs because they could make copies and rent the copies. And then, yes, they could sell regular ones too that were packaged. It was very difficult to police when it's a far-flung distribution network. And but I knew that we were killing the goose that was laying the golden egg. The minute I saw these DVDs, I said, this is the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
And then internet came in the early 2000s, and that was even a further erosion. But it became a new business model, and I'll give you an example of what I mean. You would have a membership site with 100,000 eyeballs, and they would have to pay a membership to see movies. Or you would have a free site with 1 million eyeballs, and what they would have are click-throughs. That's how they make their money. And the click-throughs are to dating sites and so forth. And they get paid by click-throughs. So that is the new business model. So that's why porn is free. So I didn't really want to catch myself up in the click-through thing. I really enjoyed the experience of, I made the movies, I edited my own movies, I wrote the music to my movies, I designed the box covers to my movies. It was a wonderful, I hired the talent. I worked with talent agents. Some of the actors turned out were straight, but they had sex with men for money. It just was a fun experience. We found locations. I created crazy ideas and crazy scenarios for my movies. So I had a great time.
Freddie, I gotta ask, just to follow up, what makes a quality porn cover from your standpoint?
Well, I always, first of all, I took a class at LACC back in the 80s on something called high concepts. So if you're going to pitch to Hollywood an idea for a show, you have to have something called a logline. So I did research about this, and what is a logline? It tells you what the plot of the whole thing is in one sentence, maybe two, but the better ones are basically one sentence. You know, a shark terrorizes a beachside community. Oh, Jaws. Well, you know, and the word Jaws. And, you know, so my first idea that I always have is to come up with the name of a movie. So my first movie in 1999 was called School of Hard Cocks.
Oh,
Love it.
It's based on a real story. When I worked at Catalina, I was taken on a ride, because they were in the Valley. I was taken on a ride into Hollywood or West Hollywood to one of the side streets like Laurel, just off of Santa Monica. And there was a house, and I wasn't allowed to get out of the car, but I could see there was a Corvette in the parking lot. And they told me that there were young men who were kind of like in a holding pattern, being flown in from all parts, tanned for a few days, rested and fed before they got on the set to work on the movies. So I thought, well, why don't I make a movie about guys teaching other guys how to have gay sex, how the porn actors do it, and kind of like to show that, you know, maybe there was a preparation, maybe they had to like be prepared to be on the set. You can't just leave it all to chance.
It's going on my list of must watchers now. I got it written down. School of Hard Cocks.
And then my one I'm famous for is this series I have called A Rim with a View. That was, and I came up with a name because I love punny titles.
Oh my gosh.
And they were basically movies about this clear plastic rim chair called the Rim Perfect. The chair when you care for back there. So I just had a lot of hooks, you know. So I like good titles, you know, Taste Like Chicken, Trying to Get Your Gun, you know, funny names. Some names that I wanted to make, but I never could. Afghani Tranny. You know, back in the 80s, there was this war in Afghanistan, and I saw an article in the paper about how young gay men were wearing kohl eyeliner, and they were kind of like gay prostitutes in Kabul. I was like, oh, that would make an interesting story. And then another one I wanted to make was Miss Trannyverse. You know, tranny is not a very politically correct word anymore, but at the time, so it was about this group of drag or trans performers who were going to bribe the judges and each other to win the contest.
Oh, wow.
We are a show that loves a good pun, so you're in good company here.
Yeah, don't, especially my husband.
And of course, I'm also known for my magazine, Dragazine magazine.
Yes.
Nice.
The magazine for Halloweeners and in-betweeners.
Oh my gosh.
This is issue number 7.
Oh,
but
wow.
anyway, so Shishi LaRue was in issue number 2, and Karen Dior, who was a very interesting drag performance artist and director and producer, was in issue number 5, wearing a whipped cream bikini on the cover. Oh, he was stunning.
Delicious.
So there was an interesting drag underground in Hollywood at the time, in the early 90s, where there was a lot of people that did drag or liked to be at drag clubs. Drag was part of the gay scene in general. And so you would have this cross-culture interaction. And I was certainly doing Dragazine. Actually, I started Dragazine when I worked at Video 10. And Karen Mason, who was a journalism major, kind of encouraged me. I think she enjoyed the fact that I was a writer. And it was fun to see that happen, that publication.
I want to shift gears just a little bit, especially coming off of this really great discussion about like the switch over to like digital and all of that. The movie that that we're talking about here, Circus of Books, is available here on streaming. You can find it on Netflix. That's where we all got a chance to watch it. And my question for you is, can you tell us a little bit about what the experience was like working with director Rachel Mason, and just the whole process of being involved in the film, being a part of the documentary, just all of that?
Yes. So I had been laid off in 2008, and I always like to say I squeezed an extra 5 years out of that job because really the writing was on the wall as early as 2003. And even for Dragazine, which I only did through 1997, magazine distribution was slowing down even in the late 90s. And I couldn't do the next issue because they were readership driven, not advertising driven. And so I had to get, paid for the previous distribution before I could make the next issue. So for the, where was I now? So the 2008, I was laid off and I got into bookkeeping, which I do now with QuickBooks. I love that. Rachel reached out to me in 2016 out of the blue saying, Freddie, I'd like to do a documentary about Circus of Books before it closes. They were talking about closing since I left. Coincidentally, the sales just plummeted right after I left.
Right, we actually saw that chart in the documentary.
It just happened to happen.
They should have had a little pointer right here. Freddie
was here.
What are you gonna do? So, so I said sure. We didn't even know it was going to make it to Netflix, and even Rachel says in some of her interviews that she would have been happy for it to be, entered into some gay archives. She would have been happy for that to happen. But last summer it premiered at the LA Gay Film Festival opening night and got rave reviews, and it's been getting fantastic reviews around the world. And all my friends have been calling me that I haven't talked to in decades, some of them, and they're saying, Freddie, I saw you. And of course, in 2016, I wasn't as buff as I am now. When you get older, you get better. So,
right.
So they caught me when I had a little more of a bare issue going, which I embrace it. So there we go. So
do we, by the way. So do we.
Yeah. So it's 2020 now, and we're riding this new wave of interest. And the timing, actually, everybody's at home. It really kind of was good timing for people to sit down and watch a Netflix show, because documentaries usually aren't very popular. But this one has a fun angle and a lovely story about a family, really. It's really Karen's character arc. I will repeat what Rachel said, by the way, on an interview that she had the other day on another podcast. Am I allowed to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Sure, yeah.
She said that Ryan Murphy, who is known for Pose and American Horror Story, we love him. He's making fantastic shows. There's a new one out called Hollywood, which we can't wait to see soon. Anyway, he told her he might be able to create a new miniseries based on Circus of Books documentary. Wow. I'm so excited.
Whoa,
so I said,
great idea.
I said, well, to Rachel, Joe Manganiello should play me, of course. I said, but who will play Jeff Stryker? I said, I'm thinking, maybe I hear John Hamm is well equipped for that role. I don't know.
Another great pun. Love it.
Well, that begs the question, Freddie, if there were a Circus of Books miniseries or show, any particularly crazy antics you think might show up there from your time?
Well, my mind reels because, there's so many interesting ideas about the bar across the street, feeding into Circus of Books late night, the magazine stacks, and actually Rachel said, I said, Rachel, should I write some notes down that I remember of interesting, quips and quotes and anecdotes? And she said, please do. She's gonna give them to Ryan, and so I said, okay, I'll try. And so one of the things that Barry Mason always used to say was that, like General Motors, who creates Geo Metros and Cadillacs, Circus of Books Video 10, which was our wholesale division, has the low end and the high end. Same concept. So we had A titles and B titles. He always used to say, in 1939, there was one gun with the wind, but there was 100 B titles. And that's the stuff that actually supports the A titles. Right. So he was a smart businessman from the beginning. He ran it like a real business, and he hired people who were honest, and our reputation was very honest. And that was one reason why we retained Matt Sterling. He really believed that we gave him an honest accounting of how many videos we sold, and that was important to him because I think he wasn't sure about other distributors that he had before us. So that attracted that kind of producer.
Yeah, you talked about. I can do a follow-up here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You talked about how it was run like a business, and the documentary. It's just so interesting the way you have this like straight Jewish couple running this business, and they were probably great business people, great people to build this business and work with people. But in terms of like the product they were selling, they really had at the time they didn't have any connection to, right? They had no connection to the product whatsoever. It was just through the people like yourself and others. And I think that's so fascinating.
It was fascinating. Maybe Barry very rarely would obviously, when we signed contracts, would meet producers who were also businessmen as well. We never had any productions that took place around or inside the premises. It was always a finished product brought to us. And so you had to, there was a lot of expenses to track. Printing and editing and shipping and you had to pay everybody duplication. You had to get the best prices, and we had to store it. We had various locations. And another thing that Barry and Karen did that was smart was they took some of their profits and they bought some real estate in the neighborhood. So I always like to, when I see some of their apartment buildings, I call them the Video 10 apartments. Because, and I always thought in 2008, well, why don't you just let me help you do property management? Because I think I helped you buy those buildings. But they didn't go for that. It wasn't meant to be. You mentioned the kind of some of the after hours stuff that would, like when the bars closed, but the bookstore was open pretty much 24/7. And, I get the impression this bookstore did not have one, but a lot of bookstores have like arcades associated with them. This one did not. Yeah. They did for a minute, and then they had to get rid of them. But there were arcades in the valley, I think.
Yeah.
And I know what you mean. There are these little video booths, and they had situations like they might even have a glory hole situation, perhaps. But
the dark side of porn stores.
Yeah, it was a lot of what I like to call it furtive sex, which is one of my favorite kinds of sex. Mm-hmm. Furtive.
It's always fun to hear about those seedy times.
And I'm a survivor, and I don't want to trade my experience for anything. And it's kind of like a wonderful experience. But I gotta say that I'm jealous of the young people today who could grow up and be open about themselves right from the get-go.
Yeah.
If I had that opportunity as a child, or, there's even a documentary about child drag queens that I saw on Netflix, which I was like, oh, what? I loved dressing up back then too, just for, I call it gender play, which I think is normal. And thank goodness my family was not repressive in any way. So, they let me act out. And my mother was concerned about whether or not I was happy being a man. So she didn't really care that I dressed up. She just wanted to make sure I was happy being who I was, which I thought was a healthy thing to be concerned about.
That's very lucky. Yeah, very
lucky. My family was very supportive. They even helped me, you know, when Dragazine was taking off and I had to do a lot of mailings to subscribers, they used to help me do a mailing, you know, package the envelopes and put postage on them. And so I had a great time. What's next? Next.
I think for me, the thing that was so interesting watching, you know, you mentioned that this was sort of the character arc of Karen, and I think for me, the most memorable moment of the scene, like, of the movie, you know, like the thing that's probably going to be seared into my brain for the rest of my life in a good way, was that scene very, very early on in the film where we see Karen walking and she's walking past the wall of dildos saying, well, if I don't look at them, then, you know, like if I don't look at them too closely, then I don't know what they are, but I know what they are. And I thought that was a really neat dichotomy for this, like, the story about this, like, family, you know, with the, you know, straight couple with kids, but also involved in this gay porn industry. And I was wondering, for, you know, you are getting to see the other side of that because you're doing the distribution, you're working on these titles and these posters and all of that. How much did you feel like you have to like censor yourself when the kids came around, or was it like, how did those edges like blur?
Well, the kids rarely came to the wholesale warehouse.
Yeah.
So I remember meeting them briefly. I never went to any bar mitzvahs or parties, even at the house. You know, I don't think that I never felt close enough to them to want to be more than an employee, which was fine with me. Mm-hmm. And the people I worked with, we were all wonderfully integrated at the office and got along pretty well. But we were selling widgets. So, you know, that was the way that was. Now, Karen being involved with buying, that was a fairly new thing, because as I remember, days gone by in the early 90s, we would have the managers of the stores go on the Consumer Electronics Show once a year in January, which coincided with the Adult Video Awards, CES, and Adult Expo. So every January for many, many years, that was a fantastic show to go to. And the straight crowd from the Consumer Electronics Show were, you know, chewing at the bit to get into the adult division. And they had to eventually make hours just for the industry people to see, and then they let the public in. But that was a wild, wild time. So the buyers from the stores would go to those shows and make their big buys. And so Karen got into that later on, I'm sure. But she hardly ever bothered with me in the warehouse or in my office. And as I said, I saw Barry just walking by rarely or signing a contract. But Barry and I did go together to the Free Speech Coalition seminars that they would hold at that time of year in Las Vegas. Barry was a big involvement with the Free Speech Coalition because they were helping him to fight this charge that he was selling.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a big deal. So the first day that I repeat myself. So the first day I started working there, he said to me, you know, Freddie, do you want this job? Because we could close tomorrow. And I said, yeah, I don't want this job. I was very optimistic. Mm-hmm. So as it turns out, there is a story here. So I digress. But so the people involved with this sting operation got this little store in the middle district of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of the more unusual states. There's 3 federal districts. There's Pittsburgh on one side, there's Philadelphia on the other side, and there's Harrisburg or Lebanon in the middle, which is more conservative. So there's this little store there that had an IRS lien. We know the whole story now. And so the feds went to this owner of this store and they said, well, if you help us buy 2 times, that becomes money laundering. And now this RICO Act that they created was not designed for porn. It was designed for drug money. Right. But they used it against porn. And the Meese Commission, at Meese, under Nixon, you know, they weren't winning the war on drugs. So they had to win the war on something, or they would lose their jobs. So they started working on porn. And it turns out that there was an attorney general who was later involved in savings and loans, finances, and scandals. So these people were hypocrites and just, where have I heard that before? You know,
Right.
right wing, you know,
Yeah.
holier than thou people.
It's not any better today.
No, it's the same thing, only a new package, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's what happened when I first came on board, and here I am.
Well, Freddie, we're so glad to have you here, and we really appreciate you sharing your experiences with Circus of Books. You're delightful, and we appreciate you so much.
Is it over already?
I know. Time passes so quickly, but man, thank you just so much for kind of sharing some of your insights and kind of giving us a little bit of a look into your time at Circus of Books. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Give my love to all the bears.
All right. Well, Freddie, thank you again so much. And we get a bunch of like vintage porn tapes and DVDs from a bear event we go to in Phoenix called Fur Fest. And we have like a stack of them in our closet. I'm going to have to like go now and see if we have any of the puntastic titles that you gave us already in our closet.
You know, I thought of a bear title and I never made it. It was going to be called Cummy Bears.
Oh, so see, that's up our alley.
You can use
I mean, Cummy up your alley? Totally. Oh, goodness. Well, if you ever need a review, if you do make it, Freddie, let us know.
Okay, thank you. Have a great day.
All right, we'll see you later, Freddie.
Thank you. Thanks,
All
Freddie.
right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. So, man, guys, that was awesome having a chance to sit down with Freddie. Holy crap, he had some fun things to share.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. So such a nice guy and so insightful. People often wonder what it's like to maybe work in that industry. You know what I mean? And be a creative and business person. I think he was both in that kind of an industry. And so now we get to see that from his perspective. And I think that was wonderful, as well as some insights on his work in the bookstore and his work on the film. It was great.
I loved his perspective. I loved his point of view, and I loved his energy. Like, honestly, I mean, we've got to obviously keep things going from not being like a 4-hour long episode. But gosh, I could have talked to him for hours and been fine. Like, It was such a blast, like hearing his stories.
Yeah. And
I definitely want to hear some of his porn music too. I'm definitely going to be. I'm definitely going to be looking up some of that porn music or have him send me some.
He wrote his own porn music, and he gave us the titles of some of the porns that he helped usher into the world. Rim with a View. So we're gonna
School of Hard Cocks.
School of Hard Cocks. We're gonna have to see if we can track some of those down somewhere, and maybe experience some of the amazing things that.
Maybe there's a bonus review somewhere in our future. I don't know.
Maybe a bone. Us review.
We'll take it. Yeah.
Bone Us review.
Bone Us. That's
the Bone Us review.
Yeah. Totally, that could work. But we're running long. But it was worth it. Fantastic interview. Some really great conversation with you guys tonight. I know we were a little all over the place with some of the technical issues that we were having.
Yeah.
But we worked through those best we could. Listeners, thanks so much for hanging in with us as best you could. We appreciate that. Support ever and as always. As we look to wrap up here, Jim, let's let folks know where they can find us between now and whatever we're doing next week. Maybe South by content that's currently available on Amazon, possibly, ? We'll talk about that. But Jim, where can folks interface with you?
You can please come and check out my Twitter account at JJPOutWest. I know I said come and check out my Twitter account. It's at JJP, my initials, Out West, all one word. Or check me out on Facebook under my name, Jim Pugliafico.
All right, excellent. And Will, where can people find you?
Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to come, but you can check me out on Twitter at Whatever Cove. You can find me on Facebook. My name there is William Lindis, just like it is in real life. Just send me a message so that I know who you are. because there's a lot of bots these days. A lot of bots. And also look for me on Letterboxd. Just look for William Lindis there. Give it a follow. I'll follow you back.
Not letterbots, letterboxed.
Not letterbots. You know, yeah.
Hey, what kind of sex do gay robots like?
What? Hey, Brad.
Bottoming.
What?
Close.
What kind of sex do gay robots like?
They like the bot sex.
They like it in the bot.
They like it in the bot.
Yeah, they like it in the bot. Okay, yeah.
I'm out of here. I'm punching you. It's time to end. Hey, if you want to chat with me online, you can find me on Twitter at iBradPro. You can also find me on Letterboxd under the same name, or Facebook under Brad Harris. Please just send a message first. We'll mention the bots. We probably give those silly bots more airtime than they deserve, but it's a real thing. I mean, they're starting to use pictures of bears, and they're getting smarter. So just say hi first. Let me know you're from the podcast, and I can't wait to chat movies with you. If you happen to send nudes, I mean, I'm not gonna, as long as you're over 18, I'm not gonna have a problem with that necessarily. But just give me a heads up first. That would be great. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.